Welcome to this afternoon's online program. I don't know how to better say it in this long delayed activity, but still, thank you for being there. We cannot blame Typhoon Auring for this because it has not yet arrived. But at the same, thank you so much. No, on behalf of His Excellency Archbishop Jose Espalma and the whole team of social media team for this afternoon's affair, our partners for Payability and Smart, welcome to this online activity for our series of webinars. This is some of those webinars we have, getting closer to the commemoration of. Before we introduce our speaker for this afternoon, we would like to thank our previous speaker, the one we had last Saturday, Monsignor Vinco, for representing viewers for that webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. And in this afternoon, without further delay, allow me to introduce to you our speaker for this afternoon. My professor when I was yet a seminarian, and now as a priest assigned in the seminary, my co-formator, and the diocese of Seo Mayor de San Carlos. And he had his MA Theology at the Loyola School of Theology at Ateneo de Manila, and also had his licentiate and doctoral degrees in theology from the Catholic University of Leuven, Belgium. Allow me, with much pride, welcome to you our speaker afternoon, Father Ramon Echica.
The kind introduction, Father Jojo, for the sake of transparency. Father Jojo de Aquino is distantly related to me. Okay, so the title of my talk is 500 Years of Secular Clergy in the Philippines. The reason for this topic is obvious, 500 years, because this year we are marking the 500th anniversary of the introduction of Christianity to our shores. And since I am a secular priest, that's why I am talking about 500 years of secular clergy in the Philippines. But I need to explain why use the term secular instead of diocesan. Many of us prefer use the term diocesan religious. The religious supposedly are concerned with the spiritual, while the secular are this worldly. But it doesn't have to take that meaning. For us to be secular means that we are in the world. It does not mean that we live worldly values. So we are in the world, but not worldly. In other words, we are in the forefront in this battle for God's kingdom. Okay? To put it in today's terms, we are, the secular clergy would be the frontliners. So, it's actually my personal advocacy between the term secular. So with the terms clarified, I go to the meat of my talk with the proviso that I am not a professional historian. I happen to be interested in history, but this is not my personal training. Okay, so if ever there are professional historians watching this webinar, okay, I am very much open to your corrections. If I may give quite an objectionable analogy, theology or philosophy is my wife, and history is my mistress. Okay. But sometimes relationship with a mistress can be more exciting. Just kidding. So let me go to the meat of my talk. The first secular priest, the forebears came into contact with is Pedro de Valderrama, the priest who presided the first Easter Sunday Mass in the Philippines, which is now concluded by the NHCP, the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, to have taken place in Limasawa. Hopefully, this decision will be accepted with finality. Valderrama, Pedro de Valderrama, was from Andalusia and served as a chaplain of the Magellan expedition. Maybe we can say that the first contact of the natives with a secular priest was inauspicious. We don't know much about him, and there is no record of him saying some substantial things to the natives. In fact, it was Magellan who catechized the natives. To the extent that there was catechism, it was Magellan who did it, not the secular priest, Pedro de Valderrama. Okay? So the first with the secular priest was rather inauspicious. Now, the founding father of the Filipino secular clergy is Archbishop Diego Camacho y Avila of Manila, who believed that the ordination of the natives was long overdue. The first known native priest is Father Francisco Baluyot from Gagua, Pampanga. He was ordained on December 21, 1698. Now, this is interesting for us Cebuanos because he may have been ordained expressly for the suffragan diocese of Cebu, which was under Bishop Miguel Bayot. Okay? So, we do not know, by the way, if Bishop Bayot ordained some natives in Cebu. We don't have a record of it, but a biography of his would suggest that he was in favor of ordaining natives. He was of the same mind as Archbishop Camacho, Diego Camacho of Manila. Okay, so we know practically nothing about this first priest, Francisco Baluyot. Don't know how he performed his ministry. The historian who unearthed the records of his ordination simply writes, we can infer that he impressed upon Archbishop Camacho as a talented and sincere man of God for the prelate to choose him as his first Filipino ordainee. Okay, so 1698. Why did it take such a long time for the Spanish missionaries to have and give a well, there can be several reasons for this. Okay. Imagine that the Legazpi expedition arrived here in 1565, and the first known ordination of a native happened in 1588. And the question is, why did it take such a long time? Was it racial prejudice? The racial prejudice in the Spanish friars that may have played a part. For example, the Augustinian chronicler Friar Gaspar de San Agustin attacked the possibility of having a program designed to educate the Indians for holy orders. Let me quote. For the Indu who seeks holy orders, does so not because he is called to a more perfect state of life, but because of the great and almost infinite advantages which accrue to him along with the new state of life which he chooses. How much better it is to be a reverend father than to be a bagong tao, meaning an unmarried young man, or a sacristan, between rowing a galley and being conveyed in one. All of which does not apply to the Spaniard, who by becoming a cleric deprives himself of the opportunity of becoming a mayor, a captain or general, together with many other comforts of his native land, where his estate has more to offer than the whole nation of Indians. Imagine the heirs with which such a one will extend his hand to the guest. Okay, such a racist remark, no? By the way, I finished the quote. Okay. Such a racist remark. In other words, he could not imagine an angel offering his hand to be kissed, possibly offering his hand to some lay conquistadores. Okay. And besides, an angel has some selfish interest to get ordained. If an angel gets ordained, then he will not have to be a sacristan. Whereas if it is a Spaniard who wants to be elevated to the sacrament of holy orders, then he has to surrender the possibility of becoming a mayor, becoming a lieutenant. That isn't true of an angel. Okay? An angel would elevate his status once he gets ordained. And so there is a racial bias. But such racist attitude could not explain the whole problem. The comment could not have been representative of the attitude of the friars in general. In fact, the question why it took more than 100 years before the first Indio was ordained is even more highlighted by the fact that Dominicans who used to work here in the Philippines and eventually were assigned to China and Tonkin encouraged native vocations. And they sent these native vocations there to UST in order to study for the priesthood. Thus, we cannot say that European feeling of superiority was the main answer. Okay? Because in other places, they actually encourage the natives to get ordained. What's the difference between Tonkin and the Philippines? Okay. Now, Tonkin was under the the Philippines was under the patronato system, whereas Tonkin was under the propaganda fide. Okay? So, what is the patronato system? We were actually not directly under the supervision of Rome. Okay? Spain was willing to send missionaries. Spain, which was a powerful empire, was willing to send missionaries, but in exchange, get complete control of the mission here in the Philippines. Okay? It was the most practical arrangement because Rome then could not send missionaries. Okay? Another possible explanation why it took such a long time for a native to be ordained maybe would be celibacy. Because celibacy is not a value in any culture except in a Catholic culture. And I think it would be difficult for a male Hindu to practice celibacy when the whole when the whole village would not be appreciative of celibacy. Okay. Anyway, since we were under the patronatal system, and then there were enough supply of priests, the Spanish missionaries must have thought, if the system is working, why fix it? Okay. So although the ordination of the Indians came rather late, once it started, there was no stopping the slow but steady supply of native priests who proved equal to the Spanish friars. Okay. The first few Indians to be ordained were, we can say, men of quality. But this trend was disrupted by Manila Archbishop Basilio Sancha Justa y Rufina. Sancho de Santa Justa y Rufina. He initiated a mass ordination program. By the way, I follow here the opinion that there was a mass ordination program. There is another opinion which says there was no such thing. Okay. What were his motivations? What were the motivations of this archbishop to ordain so many natives? But before I go to his motivations, let's remember that he was already part of the Bourbon dynasty, which was not committed to the Catholic faith, the previous Habsburg dynasty. Okay. Philip II belonged to the Habsburg dynasty, and I think he was really committed to the Catholic faith. He would say, for instance, that he was willing to spend a fortune just to save one soul. Of course, there would be some amount of exaggeration there, but the point here is he was committed to the spread of the faith. The Bourbon dynasty was not that committed. Okay. Second, there was a need for more priests. Okay. And thirdly, the religious, having their own organizational structure, oftentimes resented the visitation of the archbishop. This is the so-called visitation controversy. What was this controversy all about? The religious would be visited by a secular archbishop. Now, if one is working under Manila, even if one is a religious, then he still would be under a secular archbishop. But the religious, the friars, and the Jesuits, they had their own superiors. And many of these religious people, many of these religious members of the religious congregations resented the visitation of the archbishop. And since the archbishop felt that resentment, his solution was to ordain many natives. So there was this mass ordination. Okay. The start of what John Schumacher called the decadence of the secular clergy. The products of this crash program became the seminary formators of the future, relaying the little that they learned. It was a joke then, quoted by Horacio de la Costa and also John Schumacher, that there were no more oarsmen left in Pasig because the archbishop had ordained them all. Wala na tigbog sa Pasig, kaya giordinahan na sa obispo, tanan. Okay? One observer wrote that they were learning very bad Latin and a little of Laraga. Okay? Today, that would be equivalent of saying that seminarians are learning very bad English and a little of Karl Rahner. Okay, so or a little of Dinakuli. Okay, now, a study the secular clergy in the Philippines during the time of the Spanish colonization again, would not be complete without mentioning this secularization controversy. The Filipino clergy felt that the more important and bigger parishes were not given to them, or worse, were taken away from them. They sometimes asked when they started to think themselves as one belonging to one nation. Okay, at that time, Ilonggos would think of themselves as Ilonggos. Okay, Ilocanos would think of themselves as Ilocanos, and the Cebuanos would think of themselves as Cebuanos. There was not a sense of one nation, and I would say that this secularization controversy contributed to the formation of a nationalist consciousness because most of the secular priests were natives and almost all religious were Spaniards. And so when there was this controversy between the religious and the local clergy, the one unintended positive consequence was the formation of a nationalist consciousness. We started thinking of ourselves as one nation, siding with the local secular clergy. Okay. Now, ironically, one important figure in this controversy was of Spanish blood, Pedro Pilais, but who was born here in the Philippines. Pedro Pilais, he obtained his doctorate in UST. His sympathies, however, were with the Filipino secular clergy. He was a secretary to the Archbishop and was influential both to the Spanish and Filipino clergy. He defended the rights of the Filipino clergy. He urged the Spanish friars to take the exams for the parishes together with the secular clergy. So can you imagine someone of Spanish blood, but saying to the friars, if you want to be assigned to the big parishes, you have to take the exams together with the native secular clergy. Okay, so here's a quote from Pedro Pilais. Is it that they eat rice rather than bread? Or that they cannot converse on whether the streets of Cadiz or Seville are narrow or wide? What a beautiful, ridiculous proofs of lack of aptitude for parishes. And yet, these are proofs they actually give. Okay? So, and Pilais, again, a strong defender of the native clergy, unfortunately died when an earthquake struck Manila, and he was saying Mass at the cathedral when this earthquake took place. His leadership in the fight for the rights of the Filipino clergy was difficult to replace. But fortunately, there was Jose Burgos, a disciple of Pilais. He was 27 when Pilais died. Born in Ilocos to a pure Spanish officer and a mother with mixed Filipino and Spanish blood, Jose Burgos earned doctoral degrees in theology and in canon law. Burgos wrote a manifesto in defense of the Filipino priest. Together with Mariano Gomez and Jacinto Zamora, he is now in the nation's pantheon of heroes. They offered their lives for the Filipinos and for the Filipino clergy. They were executed on February 17, 1872, on the charge that they were involved in the Cavite Mutiny of the same year. Okay. Their sacrifice is even more praiseworthy if we consider that they held important positions in the church. and could have chosen to remain silent and play it safe in order to rise on this in the ecclesiastical ladder. Okay, so it was a big sacrifice. They were not ordinary priests; they had doctoral degrees. But then there was an injustice, or they felt now that the Filipino clergy was left out in the assignment of the parishes, and Burgos fought for them. And well, in the end, he was executed together with uh, Gomez and Zamora. Now, it's interesting that we don't have exact records of the trial of this Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora. It's not like the trial of Rizal where the records are readily available. The trial of Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora, okay, not much is known, and there's still much mystery. Okay, there was one who was also included in the execution, okay, a lay person, but he must have thought no, that he was not included. Okay. Now, anyway, let's bear in mind, by the way, that these Burgos and Gomez and Pilais also, they were well educated, but they were not trained in the seminaries. They studied theology in the University of Santo Tomas. Okay. There was this program in UST to open the doctoral degrees to native students. Okay. Now bear in mind that aside from this program in UST, priests or seminarians aspiring to be priests were studying in seminaries, and these seminaries were still victims of the mass ordination program of Archbishop Sancho de Santa Justa y Rufina. The decaying of the formation program. Okay, that decadence of the formation program was stopped only with the coming of the Vincentians in 1861 or 1867 here in Cebu. But there were educated priests, but they were not studying in seminaries, but in the university. Of course, it's not that the seminary program was totally bad. No? I know this for a fact because okay, I happen to have seen some very ancient books here in the seminary, and these books would prove that, well, they also had a good program, but the presence of books actually does not indicate that they were also read in class. Okay. Now, the the contribution of Jose Burgos, in fact, his death contributed to the thinking of Jose Rizal. Rizal said that if not for 1872, he would have been a Jesuit. Meaning to say, his mind was opened about these issues because his mind was opened by what happened to Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora. This brings us to more thoughts about Jose Rizal and his ideas on the clergy. People today who are critical of the clergy often cite Rizal's characterization of Padre Damaso or Padre Salve. Rizal would also be critical of the education given in UST. In one chapter in El Filibusterismo, he would make fun of a class in UST wherein someone who teaches physics is actually not a physicist, does not have a degree in physics, and then the uh, the microscopes are placed inside the cabinets never used. Also, Rizal was critical of the clergy and the Catholic education, most especially given in UST. So today, singon ta, Padre Damaso na sad, citing Jose Rizal. The implicit message seems to be, if our national hero was extremely critical of the clergy, then there is something terribly wrong with the clergy. Now, this message is oversimplistic and incomplete. It's oversimplistic because it's not discussed why Rizal was critical of the friars, but not critical of the native clergy. And it's also incomplete. Our national hero was extremely critical of the friars during his time, but he also presented his idealized version of the priesthood in the person of Padre Florentino. Okay, now since I am talking about the secular clergy, it's interesting that in the novels of Rizal, the contravidas, Padre Damaso, okay, the contravidas are religious. Padre Damaso was a Franciscan, but the vida is a secular priest. Okay, so uh, the villains of Padre Damaso would use their power to suppress opposition and hide their lustful desires. But the hero is a secular priest in the person of Padre Florentino. But why present Padre Florentino when he is a fictional character? I will answer that in a while. But first, how is Padre Florentino presented? We read in the second chapter of the Fili, okay, quote, Father Florentino was seated on one of the benches astern together with other passengers and was gazing at the view unrolled before him. His neighbors made room for him. Those who passed by raised their hats, and the gamblers dared not put up their tables near him. The priest said little and did not smoke. He was not haughty and was not above mixing with other men, returning their greetings with courtesy and grace, as if he felt truly honored by their esteem. A certain air of self-possession and gravity of one who was conscious of the dignity of his person and the holiness of his office distinguished him from the ordinary run of native priests. These, few in number in any case, served at that time merely to assist the friars as coadjutors in their parishes who administered others provisionally. A brief study of the old priest's appearance, if not his white hair alone, revealed immediately that he belonged to another era, another generation, when the best young men were not afraid to expose their human dignity to outrage by taking holy orders, when the native secular priests could look upon any friar as equal, and when their calling, not yet defamed and degraded, attracted free men, not slaves, superior minds, not subservient wills. The tranquility of a soul strengthened by study and meditation, and perhaps tested by intimate moral sufferings, was evident in his grave and severe countenance. Okay. Now it's interesting that this is in the second chapter of El Filibusterismo, and in the first chapter, okay, the friars were actually together with Padre Florentino, but in a different section of that ship. Okay, the friars were together with the economically affluent members of society. But the secular priest, the idealized priest of Jose Rizal, was together with the more ordinary people. And even together with the ordinary people, he had that air of dignity. And then again, to quote Rizal here, okay, when the native secular priest could look upon any friar as equal, and when their calling, not yet defamed and degraded, attracted free men, not slaves, superior minds, not subservient wills. I think Jose Rizal was referring to the time when the clergy, the local clergy, most especially those educated in UST, okay, were well respected. Now he dedicated, this Padre Florentino, dedicated himself to his parishioners out of a sense of duty. Okay, slide. Out of a sense of duty, and cultivated his liking to the natural sciences. In Spanish, dedicóse a sus feligreses por deber, no? Por afección a las ciencias naturales, meaning to say, okay, a sense of duty with regards to his parishioners, but he also had a liking for natural sciences. Now, how was Padre Florentino as a confessor? When we reach that part of the novel, chapter 39, when Simon's plot was uncovered, and then Simon would confess to Padre Florentino, we read Padre Florentino's initial reaction. The confession was long and wearisome, but the priest no longer gave any sign of being shocked during its course and seldom interrupted Simon. And when it was time for him to speak up, we read this statement from Rizal. The voice of the priest, sad, deliberate, but consoling, broke the silence. What was his words to Simon, especially when he was asked why Simon's plot failed? Some people, mostly those people of faith, but whose faith inspired them to activism, would shed tears when reading this message of Padre Florentino, his message to Simon. The message is, because you chose means of which he could not approve, the glory of saving a country cannot be given to one who has contributed to its ruin. You believe that what crime and iniquity had stained and deformed, more crime and iniquity could clean and redeem. This was error. Hate only creates monsters, crime, criminals. Only love can work wonders. Only virtue can redeem. If our country is someday to be free, it will not be through vice and crime. It will not be through corruption of its sons. Some deceived, others bribed. Redemption presupposes virtue. Virtue, sacrifice, and sacrifice, love. Okay? I think the thoughts of Rizal are put into the mouth of Padre Florentino. The thoughts of Rizal about liberation are put into the mouth of Padre Florentino. How to liberate this country. Now, let me go to the still unanswered question of why include a fictional character in this survey of the secular clergy. The reason is that the character is based on real encounters between the young Rizal and a real priest in his hometown of Calamba, Padre Leoncio Lopez. Rizal writes to Ferdinand Blumentritt, wherein he describes the priest who served as a model for the character of Padre Florentino. So Padre Florentino na equivalent na sa real life. Kailan ni Rizal. Okay. Thank you for your letter, to which I am replying at once. This is a letter of Rizal to Blumentritt. because it is consoling to me to speak about the dead parish priest of my town. He was Padre Leoncio Lopez, a native Filipino, but in no way different from other Filipinos. He was tall, erect, distinguished looking, cultured but shy, and gentle. His best friend was my father, and I was his young friend. He was just, liberal, tolerant man. You will see his portrait in my new book. I call him Padre Florentino. Okay, let me quote Rizal more fully in the same letter to Blumentritt. At one time, we were not on friendly terms because when I was 14, I wrote some verses and he said that I must have copied them from a book. This angered me. I answered him angrily. My mother, who was present, scolded me. Half a year later, Father Leoncio learned from the Jesuits that I was in the habit of writing verses. And the old man, who was at 70, made a journey to Manila, visited me at the Ateneo Municipal, and offered me apologies. This act made us friends, and since then, we were the best friends in the town. Although he was shy, he always took my part against the Guardia Civil. We lent each other books, and when I left the Philippines secretly, I asked him to console my parents. He wrote me a letter that I consider a valuable treasure. He said his one desire before leaving this world was to see me and shake my hand. He said this was his innermost desire, but he died before I wrote the Noli. He was related to my family. He was just, liberal, tolerant man. You will see his portrait in my new book. I call him Padre Florentino. So how were they introduced? Okay. Padre Florentino was a friend of Rizal's or Jose Rizal's father. And Rizal was already writing verses at the time, but Padre Florentino could not believe that someone who's still 14 years old could already be writing verses. And so he thought that Rizal must have been copying from other sources. And this angered Rizal, but this Father Lopez came to know from the Jesuits that Rizal was in fact in the habit of writing poems. And so Father Lopez went to Ateneo Municipal to ask forgiveness, and Jose Rizal and Father Lopez became good friends. It's just too unfortunate, no, that Padre Lopez died before the Noli was published. It would have been interesting to know how this priest would react to this novel. Another notable priest is Father Vicente Garcia, also with a doctorate in theology, who defended Rizal against the criticisms of his first novel, Noli Me Tangere. Assigned as Vicar General and Provisor of the Diocese of Cáceres, he gained the affection of his province mates, so much so that Spanish authorities dared not publicly reprimand him despite his defense of Rizal. Now, a worthy successor of the triumvirate Burgos, Gomez, and Zamora is Mariano Sevilla. During the time of the revolution, he was able to strike a well-discerned balance between loyalty to the church on the one hand and love for country on the other hand. Okay. Loyalty to the church on the one hand and defense of the native clergy on the other hand. But even as he defended the native clergy, he also urged them to honor the priesthood by their virtue and learning. It was because of his clarity of vision and principles that only few priests transferred their allegiance to the Iglesia Filipina Independiente or the Aglipayanism. Okay. By the way, Aglipay, Gregorio Aglipay, was also a secular priest. Now, of course, he was not on the same intellectual level as Jose Burgos. Burgos had a doctorate in theology. Well, Aglipay, the average intelligence, I think. Okay. And you may ask this question, who is really the founder of Aglipayanism? It really depends on what you mean by founder. If by founder you mean someone who lent his name to this sect, then of course it's Gregorio Aglipay. But if you mean by founder someone who formulated the philosophy and theology of this movement, then it was the intellectual Isabelo de los Reyes. But if you mean by founder someone who manipulated the events so that there would be a native church, it would be Apolinario Mabini. Apolinario Mabini was intellectually gifted. He understood that without the support of the church, the revolution could not succeed. But now they have that problem. Why? And again, because of the religiosity of the people, the revolution could not succeed without the church. But their opponent was the clergy, the friars. So how could they gain support from the natives? So Mabini thought that it would be wise to have a native religion. Okay? And Aglipay, well, was not able to distinguish between his nationalism and his love for the church. So, that's the tragedy. Okay. Now, we go to the early 20th century up to Vatican II. Okay. The early decades of the 20th century, okay, are characterized by Schumacher as a Hispanized clergy in an Americanized country. What does it mean? Well, the church was slow to adjust. When the Americans came, today we're much more critical of the American influence. Okay? But at that time, anything American was considered progress. Progress compared to the decadence of the Spanish influence or the Spanish influence on the church. So the seminaries continued to use Spanish and Latin as the means of communication. But Filipinos started to speak English. And what was the result? Okay. Most of those trained in the Spanish system could not relate well with the local intelligentsia. Why? Well, I think there has to be a certain degree of similarity between seminary education and education of the other people in general. But since they were educated in Spanish and people started to speak English, then the local clergy then could not easily relate with the people. And so in one article, okay, Schumacher would characterize his period as Hispanized clergy in an Americanized country. If you know of some priests who are already 80 years old but who can speak English very well, these are the more intelligent priests, like Monsignor Rudy Villanueva. Okay? But they still studied in Spanish and in Latin. Okay. So we were slow to adopt. Now we go to the Marcos regime. I tried to look for examples of secular clergy who were martyred during the time of Marcos. Most of those martyrs were religious priests, like Father Rudy Romano, uh, who else? Uh, that priest in Bukidnon, okay, who was shot in his own rectory, shot to death in his own rectory. Got now the name. Okay, kalimutan ko. Anyway, so one priest, just to cite an example, one priest, one secular priest who was martyred during the time of Marcos was Zacharias Agatep. He taught farmers about land reform. He was arrested for subversion and was incarcerated for 4 months. In 1981, in view of the forthcoming visit of John Paul II, Father Agatep was released from prison apparently for propaganda purposes. Upon his release, he wrote a letter to President Marcos protesting the continuing human rights abuse. He was eventually shot to death 2 years after the papal visit, when world attention was no longer focused on the Philippines. Now, in 1986, we gained our freedom. So, what about the post authoritarian context? Other priests continued to offer their lives. One martyr for the environment was Father Neri Lito Satur, deputized by the Department of Energy and Natural Resources as forest officer, who was one of those who formed teams to fight illegal logging in the Diocese of Malaybalay. I think he made such a deep impact that even his bishop, Densi Rosales, uh, who was then the bishop of Malaybalay, and later on became an archbishop of Manila. Okay, Densi Rosales wrote a book on Father Neri Satur. Okay. So on October 14, 1991, he was ambushed while riding a motorcycle. After his fall from his motorcycle, he was shot to death point blank, presumably by people who were affected by his environmental advocacy, possibly with military connivance. Obviously, there were many other exemplary priests who lived ordinary and even saintly lives, ministering to the people of God under their care. Most of them will never see their names printed in history books, but still they give us complete faces of the ideals of the presbytery. Sadly, however, there are also priests who are not true to their calling. We need not name them, but people often caricature this priest as modern day Padre Damaso, referring to a character in Rizal's novels. Okay. This Franciscan, a sex predator of Father Maria Clara. Okay. One book which presents a journalistic investigation of the financial and sexual scandals among priests and bishops is Altars of Secrets, no, singular, Altar of Secrets by Aris Rufo. This book has gained fame or notoriety depending from which perspective it is seen. When President Rodrigo Duterte would always advertise his book as telling the death of the Catholic Church, he would urge his listeners to read the book and add, "Let us see if you still remain Catholics after reading the book." This comment from our president is obviously a misreading. The dedication clearly states, "For those who remain steadfast in their faith, yet ache for reforms within the Holy Mother Church." It was not the intention of the author to destroy the church. Okay? Again, the dedication states, "For those who remain steadfast in their faith, yet ache for reforms within the Holy Mother Church." Okay? But aside from these abuses, which find print in books, many also have their own negative contrast experiences of their encounters with some priests. By using the term negative contrast experience, we infer that many people have their own ideal picture of what a priest should be, which is contrasted with the priests they actually encountered. This brings us to the question whether these are personal failings of the priests, or whether there is something in the system that breeds unbecoming behavior of some clerics. To put it in another way, are there some rotten apples in a good barrel, or is there something wrong with the barrel itself that would make some otherwise good apples rotten? Okay, some things to ponder upon, or questions to be reflected upon. Now, let me go to my conclusion. First, the quality of formation cannot be sacrificed for the sake of expediency. During the time of Archbishop Sancho de Santa Justa y Rufina, formation was sacrificed because there was lack of secular clergy and the religious were not pliant enough. We suffered much from this mass ordination. Okay? It was very difficult to recover uh, from this program. It was only during the time when the Vincentians came when somehow the downward trend was stopped. Another conclusion I want to make is we need to distinguish what is essential that cannot be changed and what can be subject to change for the sake of a better formation. Okay? When the Americans came, seminary formation was not quick enough to change its method. There was still this use of the Spanish language as if Spanish is a language spoken in heaven. Okay? And so the priest then could not relate to the intelligentsia at the time. Okay, so that's about it. No, you may draw some other conclusions. Okay. By the way, you may ask because historically, kato sila Burgos, Gomez, and Zamora were Burgos, Gomez, and Pilares were educated in the universities. Okay. Am I open to the idea that candidates to the priesthood must study in universities, not in seminaries? Yeah, I'm open to that. But here in Cebu, okay, I think even the University of San Carlos would admit there is no good school of theology. Okay, but in Manila, again, seminary study in Ateneo, in UST. So here in Cebu, we continue with the seminary formation. But historically, okay, again, Burgos and Gomez would be good examples. They were trained in universities. Okay, thank you very much. I'm done. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Father Mon, for your lecture this afternoon. Very interesting because I now know that there are, if well, this is how I thought of it, Father. It's like you grouped also it's sort of like the development of the secular priesthood from the Spanish period up to the present. But Father, wait. We have actually several people with us inside our Zoom platform this afternoon, and I'm looking at some of the comments here. Father, you forgot the name of the priest who was shot in Bukidnon. Father Alan de Lima is saying it's
Alingal.
Father Rene
Now I
Regalado.
remember. Alingal. Now I remember.
Alingal. Okay,
Yeah,
it's
now I
not
remember.
Father Rene. Okay.
Godofredo Alingal.
Okay. Godofredo Alingal.
I think,
All right.
now I remember.
Yeah. Here's a comment, Father,
It was just a senior
from...
moment while I was talking, so that's the reason why I forgot. Okay, so what's the question?
No, it was a comment, more of a comment, Father. this one, Father, this one from Ikala. I don't know, is this a family name or this is uh, maybe an acronym. Anyway, he says, Father Mon, I have noticed that Filipinos abroad kiss the hand of the priest. Filipino or not. Is the kissing of the priest's hand a practice encouraged by the Spaniards?
I think so. I'm not very sure, but yeah, well, there are records of uh, Spanish friars objecting to uh, the failure of some natives to kiss their hands. Okay, not personally, I don't want my hands to be kissed. Okay, it's not.
Well,
Yeah,
definitely not in this time, Father.
no, it's not because I am against that culture, but my reason is that the lay people should be trained to dialogue with their priests as equals. Okay, that's how I look at it. Okay, it's I don't have any problem if some younger people would kiss my hand. Why? Because that's part of the Filipino culture.
Filipino.
That's a show of respect to elders. But when someone older than I would kiss my hand, I don't feel comfortable because I think they should deal with me as an equal. That's how I look at it. I'm not sure if that perspective is shared by my fellow priests. That's how I look at it. I refuse to give my hand to be kissed by someone older.
Well, Father, Father De Lima, Father Alan, who is actually watching our webinar this afternoon, says he seconds to your thoughts about or your opinion about having your hands kissed by people of the same age as you are or older than you are. Anyway, Father, this is my question. Maybe because probably it's there at the back of your lecture, no? But I'm just wondering, where were the seminary formations at the time of the development of these different secular priests, these different groups? Maybe from the Spanish, were the seminaries already present? What were the roles? How effective were they? Um, were there already seminaries here in Cebu at the time, or when did we have our own
You know
seminaries?
that because you studied in seminary, no? At the wall of the lobby, there is there is
There's a timeline there, Father.
so yeah. Okay. What year? Sa ito na year ni open ng seminaryo? Yeah, 1700s, no? And then the Vincentians came here in 1867. Okay. The 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 seminary here in Cebu was for a time the only good school. The only good school. In fact, uh, Usmeña and many other affluent members of the Cebuano society had to study here because the other there was no San Carlos then, there was no San Jose Recoletos. It's only the seminary that could give good education. Okay, so and Usmeña or the families of these affluent members of Cebu society demanded that, or they appealed to open the seminary to those who did not aspire to be priests. And that's the time when uh, the seminary was open to lay people. Okay, um, so
Okay.
many of the many of the educated people in Cebu at the time studied in the seminary. I once was playing host to historian Michael Collinane, uh, and I read his book, Ilustrado Politics. it's mentioned there that most representatives of the first legislative assembly in the Philippines, started in 1907. So on the year 2007 was the first centennial, and there were some books on the first legislature. And in the book by Collinay, he mentioned that most of those elected legislators in the Visayas studied in the seminary. Now, he was doing archival work in the seminary, so I had to entertain him. And he said, when I mentioned to him what I read from his book, and uh, when I mentioned that, he replied that if only he had published that book after the archival research in the seminary, he could have listed more names. So that's how influential the seminary was.
Wow. Thank you for that, Father. We have another question from Mr. Cornelio Guantero Jr. Says, Father, what are the aspects of priestly formation you think are non-negotiable, and what are those that could be changed?
Oh, non-negotiable. Well, complete human formation. But how do you define human formation? I think that's uh, also culture bound and historically conditioned. Okay, but we have to be trained as good human beings. Another would be, of course, strong academic formation. Okay, and uh, deep spiritual training. I think uh, this would be non-negotiable. But even deep spiritual training, it could also be historically conditioned, because there was a time when spirituality would mean withdrawal from the world. Today, we say spirituality is encountering God in the community. So that again uh, would be historically conditioned, but again, the basic would be deep spiritual formation.
Father, what about those that could be changed or that can be changed?
When was the SPFY introduced here in Cebu? In San Jose Seminary, it was in 1974. In Cebu, I think 1986 or 1987. That's one thing that has changed. Okay, before that, from first year theology to fourth year theology and on to ordination. Now, in between second year and third year theology, there is the spiritual pastoral formation here. Okay, a deepening of their own pastoral and spiritual training. Okay. Before that, the earlier you get ordained, the better. But when Archbishop Palma came, in fact, there would be 6 months preparation after graduation before they can be ordained deacons. So there are changes. During the time of Cardinal Vidal, okay, ordination to the diaconate happened in their 4th year. Okay, and Archbishop Palma, and I agree with this particular change, would say that, well, they should finish first the theological formation before there are changes. Okay, the most basic change in recent years will be the introduction of the spiritual pastoral formation here. I think that's the most basic change.
Just a curiosity, Father. Because I'm sorry, I'm very ignorant about this, but in every in a diocese or archdiocese that have seminary formations, you have different procedures, or how do you call this, in terms of period, duration, how long it will take them to become priests? You have different trainings. Is that what I think I understood from the
Yeah,
lecture, Father?
there, we are all guided by the ratio fundamentalis, but there are things which are also within the competence of the bishop to change. Okay, like not all seminaries have the SPFY. UST, I think, still does not have the SPFY. Almost all already have. So there is a common document called the Ratio Fundamentalis, but how this is interpreted, uh, that's how powerful a bishop is, because he does the interpretation.
Mm, okay. So this is not something that we could, that the bishops could discuss, Father, and come up with a, maybe regular or consistent formation, Father, that is shared all throughout the seminaries here in the Philippines.
Yeah, there are advantages and disadvantages, no? Okay. If you make it all uniform, the problem would be the different cultures also. Okay. So that would be a disadvantage if you make everything uniform. But the disadvantage, if you just leave everything to uh, the decision of the seminary formators, the bishops, then it could be whimsical. So again, there are advantages and disadvantages. But overall, I think this is a good arrangement that there are guidelines which are uniform, but there's also room for uh, adaptation to
Mm,
local culture.
yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, Father Mon. Um, for those who have not sent in their questions, please, you may comment them here at the comment section, of course, and we'll try to fit in your questions to and give them to Father Mon. But we're waiting for some. But here's another question, Father. This comes from Dion Abelia. Thank you for your question, Father. What effects did the Philippinization of the episcopacy in the Philippines have any impact in the secular clergy?
What effects? Can you repeat the question? What
Uh,
are the effects of?
what effects did the Philippinization of the episcopacy in the Philippines have any impact with the secular clergy?
Okay, the Philippinization of the episcopacy. Most of the, I think all, I'm not very sure if there are exceptions. Most of the Filipino bishops are secular priests. No, not all, because there are Bishop Claver, for instance, Filipino but religious. So not all. Erase that comment. Okay, but most Filipino bishops are secular. And what would be the effects on the clergy? I have to think about that much more thoroughly. Well, I think it would be good to be headed by someone who belongs to your own secular clergy. There are many bishops pa na belonging to the religious, like Bishop Buzon, Bishop Cantillas, some others, no? And yeah, what would be the effects if the archdiocese is led by uh, a secular bishop himself? Are there some differences? I would think so, pero I cannot. I mean, I have to think of it much more thoroughly. But personally, I would feel much more comfortable under a secular bishop. Okay, because we have the same spirituality, all this, no? Okay, but it's possible for a religious to be like to be aside here. Okay, so yeah, uh, if
Okay.
echoes
Maybe
siguro.
this is our last question, Father. Um, this is from Geraldine. I don't know if it is Faith, Geraldine Faith. I don't know her family name, but Geraldine's question, Father, is this. Father, what is the future of secular priests in the Philippine society? Will they trailblaze?
How's that again? What's the
What is
feature
the
of
future
a
of the
future?
secular priest in, yeah, future?
Oh, my first answer is I'm not a prophet. Okay, so I don't know about the future of the secular clergy, but uh, there are indications rather that vocations are still growing. Okay, in the 1980s, wala pa yung seminary in Cagayan. No seminary yet in Palo. And so, uh, the new seminaries would indicate that the numbers are still growing. Whether they are growing in proportion to the growth of the population, that's another thing. Okay, but yeah, there's a steady supply. With regards the quality,
Yeah.
first of all, how do we measure the quality of the secular clergy? Hmm, I there are many seminaries now. I think all many seminaries now offer masteral degrees, and I think that would contribute to the professionalization of their education. Okay, so these are good signs. Are there some negative signs?
Yeah. Are
I
there?
well, there are. There will always be. I rather not mention these negative signs, but there are. Okay, uh, it's impossible, I think, to perfect the formation program. Okay, that would not be possible here on Earth.
Yeah.
But comparing the formation during the time of during pre-Vatican II days and the formation received by the seminaries today, yeah, I would think that the formation today is better. Okay, it's much more integral. Okay, so
So,
that's my answer.
well, at least it's these are positive signs, Father, that the seminary formation is evolving for the better.
I would
Um,
think so, but actually I'm biased, no, because I'm uh, assigned here in the seminary. It would, I think, take an outsider to make an objective judgment.
Anyway, Father, maybe this is the one last na lang yun because someone tried to catch up with another question. And it's very interesting because you mentioned a while ago, Father, that one of the reasons during the early Spanish period or colonization, the priesthood did not attract a lot of the natives because one of the reasons you mentioned was because of celibacy. Not is
Mhm.
it because you celibacy was not valued, no, but in other cultures like our probably culture also at the time. Um, there's this question again from Mr. Cornelo Guantero. He's asking how likely is that the Catholic Church in the Philippines would have married priests or deacons. How likely?
How likely? Mm, uh, do you want my answer as a theologian, or do you want my answer as a priest myself? No? As a theologian, there is really no dogmatic issue when it comes to making celibacy optional. Okay, it happens that it is currently what is demanded of uh, the clerics. Okay, we have to be celibates, but there is nothing that is permanent there. Okay, it's not like uh, the Trinity, for instance. No, it's not like that. And so, whether or not it can change, I really don't know. Okay, as a seminary formator, I work within I work within certain parameters. Okay, and within those parameters, we try to produce priests with integrity, priests with uh, solid theological background, can within these parameters, because otherwise they cannot be ordained. But am I in favor of and making celibacy optional? I leave my. I prefer not to answer the question na lang. Okay. For now, we work within certain parameters. Okay. But let me clarify. I said that celibacy was one of the reasons why uh, it would be difficult to ordain natives. Can you imagine you're a celibate and then the whole village would not understand what celibacy is all about? Okay. I am reminded of a story narrated to me by my spiritual director. Okay, by the way, my spiritual director was Thomas Green. There was one priest assigned in a village where a village which did not have any experience having a priest before. So he was the first priest assigned in that village. And you know what? The villagers offered him a woman because they just could not understand what celibacy is. And in fact, maybe the villagers then thought that this guy would potentially victimize our daughters if not given a woman.
Hmm.
And so they gave him that woman. But the nice thing about the story is the priest rejected the offer, and he was able to prove to the villagers that it is possible to live a healthy celibate lifestyle. Was able to, but that was something new to the village. So I don't know. I often make this joke. I don't know where that village is. It was just narrated to me by my spiritual director, and sa na nag-offeran man og babae. But really, it can happen.
Well, Father, what is important is that it's accepted here already in the Philippines. I mean, it's okay for our priests to be
it's okay for a priest.
chased and
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there is a scientific survey made whether Catholics are ready to accept married clergy. In other countries, surveys have been made, and people are ready to accept that. I'm not sure if there were surveys done here in the Philippines. But karo married deacons, by the way, that's already practiced in other countries. These
yes,
deacons would live
there's a
in their
comment here.
own
Yeah.
residences, and they would go to the parish on Sundays to help the priest. That's already done in other countries.
The last brother.
Yeah. Oh,
Choosing.
okay. All right. Because we don't have time anymore, Father, this has become a very interesting Q&A. I know that with these kinds of questions already coming out, there will be other questions that will lead to more interesting questions, but we don't have time. Maybe for those who still want to ask questions for Father Mon, maybe we could entertain them, but offline. We'll send the questions to Father Mon because this webinar is going to be posted in our 500 Years of Christianity of the Archdiocese FB page. And there are those who weren't able to come in our webinar this afternoon through our Zoom platform, but definitely they can still catch up by listening to the recorded webinar and ask questions. So we're going to be posting rather right after this webinar because we experienced a bit of technical difficulties at the start.
Okay, thank
And
you
with
also
that,
for
we'd like to thank Father
thank you also for
Mon.
inviting
Thank you
me.
very much for accepting our invitation. We look forward to maybe other webinars later on from Father Mon and from our local experts here in Cebu. But for everyone's information, this will be our last webinar before we go to the heart, according to Father Jojo, to the heart of the celebration this April. After April, we will still continue with our webinars, but as to what they are, that we will be posting schedules for that. So thank you again, Father Mon, for being our last resource speaker for our webinar before we go to our April celebration. And thank you very much to the many people who joined us this afternoon through our Zoom. Especially, I think there are many of our seminarians who are listening to Father Mon's lecture. Hi to you. I know some of them. So, Father, thank you again.
Okay, you're welcome. At your service.
Thank you, Father. I hope to see you soon after the pandemic, Father, and maybe get back into maybe the seminary and get some classes again.
Okay. Yeah. Sige, thank you.
So thank you, Father. And we thank also Father Alan and the other priests who are here watching us this afternoon. Hi, Father Alan. And
By
so
the
we'd
way,
like to thank
you,
everyone else.
who are
Yes,
the
Father.
priests? Who are my fellow priests who are watching?
I just know Father Alan because he commented, Father. So I don't wasn't able to see all of the participants' name.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure, Father, they'll be listening to the recorded webinar, which we will be posting after. So thank you, Father. And with that, in behalf of the 500 Years of Christianity of the Archdiocese Committee on Social Media Activities, headed by the Archbishop of Cebu, Archbishop Jose Palma, and Father Marbalili, who is the overall chair of the celebration, 500 Years of Christianity celebration, and with Father Jojo de Aquino, who is the coordinator of our social media activities. We'd like to thank everyone who is here and, of course, our sponsors for making our webinars possible this afternoon and all our online activities, actually. I would also like to thank the Singles for Christ Cebu, who was ensuring that we are able to hold our online activities. Actually, at the start, they were there in August up to who knows? No, just joking, because they are now admin, I think the admin for our social media page. And just heads up, in March, we have our last online talk show. Please watch out for that. And it's going to be about Bishop Teofilo Kamomot. So that will be sometime in March, an online talk show. And so I'd like to thank again everyone who's here in our Zoom platform. Thank you very much for listening and participating, sending in your questions. And we hope to see you in our online activities even after the April celebration. With that, good afternoon and God bless.